Good day. Good day and welcome to Mental Health and You. I'm your host, Cynthia Timms. Righteous and Relentless. Black Women in the Legacy of Peer Support. Let's talk more about that. In my last show, we touched upon it, but on this episode, I want to give it more context. How have peer support helped you, particularly in your life, particularly with women of color? How has it impacted your journey, your trials and tribulations? We're going to examine today some women who have overcome a lot, who overcame a lot. And let's see, maybe we can learn from them. These are some of my heroes. Maybe there's some of yours as well. So you ready? Let's learn, let's be inspired. For every day, there's something to learn. Every day, there's something to learn in peer support and from our ancestors. They're talking to us. So let's go. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Daisy Bates. Daisy Bates, yo, have you ever heard of her? She's an icon, someone who needs to be talked about. She's one of my heroes. When I think about my writing, when I think about my journey in journalism, want to do some public speaking, Daisy Bates came to mind. I learned about her many years ago in the movement. So who was she? She was the architect of the Little Rock Nine, y'all. September 1957, Central High School in Little Rock got integrated. And this woman, who was a newspaper publisher along with her husband in Little Rock, Arkansas, helped gather, helped bring together the 9 young high school students who would make history. Known as the Little Rock Nine, they integrated the Little Rock school system. Now, where did this woman find her strength? In the midst of death threats, in the midst of intimidation. This black woman, let's examine. Let's be inspired. Daisy Bates, y'all, was born in 1914 in Little Rock, Arkansas. It was born in 1914 in Arkansas. Daisy Gaston. Her mother was murdered by racists, 3 racists, white racists, who got away with it. So she never really knew her mother. Her father, to escape the violence that was going on, he fled, but he left his daughter in the hands of some friends to raise. Think about that, y'all. Think about that terror. So Daisy grew up with this hatred in her heart. Can you relate? In the midst of everything, can you relate? How have you dealt with hatred? Maybe feelings of abandonment. So, in the midst of this, who was her supports? Her supports were her community, her faith. She married her husband, and together, she married her husband in 1941-42, and together they formed a black newspaper in Arkansas. They moved to Little Rock and formed a black newspaper that reported on all the events in the black community. So here comes 1957, when the state of Arkansas was being forced to integrate against the desires and the wishes of the white population in that area. Faced with so much intimidation, faced with so much hatred. Can you imagine? Daisy Bates. Can you relate? But in spite of everything, she knew she had a mission. The architect of the Little Rock Nine, She comforted them. She provided a home for them. So she was their peer support, but they were also hers. That community, her husband, her newspaper, her activism. She went on to become friends with Dr. Martin Luther King and spoke at the 1963 March on Washington, one of the few women to do so. Daisy Bates died in 1999, but she left a legacy. I want you to know her because she needs to be known. She needs to be seen and she needs to be learned about. Peer support in the midst of so much. What would you do in a situation like that? When faced with so much hatred, so much adversity. Your parents were killed. Your mother was killed by racists who got away. What would you do? But I heard her say in an interview that she had to let her hatred turn into something else, her activism, that paved the way. Because hatred alone and hating alone was like a poison that was killing. So how can you turn it around? How can you turn your hatred, your feelings of abandonment around? Where's your community? What supports you in the midst of so much? Daisy Bates, for future studies, for studies right now. An inspiration. So let's go, y'all, to the next one. We're going to keep on going as far as long as we can. Ida B. Wells. No, Fannie Lou Hamer. Thank you. Fannie Lou Hamer. Brought up also in the midst of this time in Mississippi. Your Fannie Lou Hamer was born in 1917. The 20th of 20 children. Can you imagine? The 20th of 20 children to a sharecropper husband and wife. Not many of her siblings lived to adulthood. She was one of the few. So growing up in the midst of that, now you're feeling a certain way. You're growing up on a plantation in Mississippi where you're not even seen as a first-rate citizen. You're a plantation worker. You can't vote. You have no say in your livelihood. Growing up, Fannie Lou recognized and realized there was something more. 1917, y'all, think about that. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt you wanted to do better in spite of your circumstances? The 20th of 20th children. Fannie Lou went on to get married and she wanted to have a family. But due to several miscarriages, she went to a doctor who performed involuntary sterilization on her. Let me say that again. She got married, she wanted to have a family, but she couldn't have kids biologically due to, fibroids. That could have been taken care of. But she went to a doctor who performed a hysterectomy. This sent Fannie, according to my research, into a deep depression, a deep despair. Can you imagine having something done to you like that without your knowledge? What was her support? Her support was her faith. Fannie Lou was a woman of deep faith. She loved singing. She loved inspiring. Not long after that, her and her husband eventually went on to adopt a couple of daughters. But she also got involved in the movement. The SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was in the area of Mississippi where she worked on the plantation. And they were recruiting. Fannie became intrigued. She wanted to get involved because she realized, in order to improve her life and the life of others, that the vote was important. And as is, she couldn't vote. She couldn't vote. She was a black woman, on a plantation, living in a suppressive society like Mississippi, where those basic rights were denied. But this did not stop Fannie. She was a warrior for justice and for peace. Coining the phrase, if you can remember, being sick and tired of being sick and tired. This is a woman who went on to be beaten, shot at, but she did not let it stop her. She had some education, some formal education, not much. She could read and write. Never finished, never went further, I believe, than the 4th grade. But she did not let it stop her because she had a purpose. What is your purpose? What is your purpose? I think when you find that in peer support, it's like something opens up in you. I would like to believe something opened up in Fannie when she found a purpose. She knew and she believed that the right to vote meant first-class citizenship, and she would not allow anyone or anything to turn her around. So in the midst of intimidations, in the midst of shootings, in the midst of harassment, being fired from the plantation, moving from house to house to avoid racists who were intimidating and harassing her, she continued. What can we learn from her? These are people, y'all. These are ancestors that I believe that is so important to know about. Daisy Bates, Fannie Lou Hammmer. Have you ever been so down that sometimes you didn't know what to do yourself? Have you ever been so down that you just wanted just to give up? Imagine how Fannie Lou felt. Imagine how Daisy felt. Wow, that's something. Daisy Bates, her mother was killed by racists. Her father fled. Raised by friends, filled with hatred, she turned it around with the help of her community, with the help of her faith. What has helped you? What has helped you? So we're going to ask some things. We're going to take a break soon. And we're going to continue to talk about certain aspects of peer support. Maybe we're going to hopefully be inspired. What about Daisy Bates? What about Fannie Lou can we take that can inspire us? What are the obstacles you're dealing with? What are the challenges? I know I'm dealing with. I'm a work in progress every day. Some days I don't even want to get up. But it's these days that I think about my ancestors. I think about the women who came before me. I'm thinking that maybe there's a purpose when you don't even sometimes believe it. What's your purpose? So we're going to take a break. And on the other side, we're going to continue with mental health and you, righteous and relentless.
Cuanto antes reconozcas las señales del autismo, más temprano puedes hacer una diferencia de por vida por tu hijo. Comienza con unas preguntas sencillas en detecciondeautismo.org.
Black
My
women.
mother was always very familiar with her neighborhood, but one day she stopped at the stop sign for much longer than usual, and she didn't know whether she should go forward or turn, and she wasn't even really sure where she was at. It was very unsettling for her.
I felt so much better after my son told me, "Mom, I don't want you to worry or be afraid. I'll be there for you and we'll figure it out."
When I was in foster care, I never knew when I would have to move, so I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day, I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
Good day, and welcome back to Mental Health and You. I'm your host, Cynthia Timms. We've been talking on the topic today of being righteous and relentless, Black women and the legacy of peer support. Now, before I go on with my other the other women I want to highlight today, I want to talk about why righteous and why relentless. Because I felt that these women had a righteous calling. I felt that these women had a calling and a mission that they knew that in spite of so much, in spite of all the obstacles that they put on this earth to do, they may not have known it at the time, but somewhere along the way, with the help of their support, their community, their faith, they came to realize it. That didn't mean that they didn't have obstacles, but that's what peer support is about. That didn't mean they didn't have barriers, but that's what peer support is about. What is your support in the midst of obstacles, in the midst of turmoil, in the midst of turbulence? We spoke about Daisy Bates. We spoke about Fannie Lou Hammmer for further study. Now we're going to speak about someone else. Bring up Ida B. Wells. Let me tell you about Ida B. Wells. When I was in college, a few years ago, undergraduate school, I had an assignment to write a paper on someone that I found inspirational. And I didn't know much about Miss Wells back then, but the more I read on her, the more I became inspired. And I was so inspired by so much. So let's talk about her and how she used peer support along the way. Born in 1862 in Mississippi, y'all. Born in 1862 in Mississippi. Her family died at an early age, both her parents, and she was left to raise her siblings. So think about that. Who's been in that sort of position where you had to step up to the plate in positions? Family issues, school issues, job issues, maybe becoming an adult long before you should have. I know I did. It's not easy, but I credit a support system to help me along the way. So Ida B. Wells, in the midst of all of this, she became a school teacher because she wanted to make life better for those around her, including her family. So her community, her family was her support. But one day she was in a car going someplace. A car, no, not a car, because they didn't have cars like we have them back then. She was in a train car with a first class ticket, this Black woman. And she was thrown off the train. Yo, can you imagine that? Long before Rosa Parks, she was thrown off the train for being a Black woman with a first class ticket. Wow. Can you imagine the humiliation of that? The embarrassment of that? Can you imagine the injustice of that? This led to her activism. She in turn started a newspaper where she talked about, where she activated, she aggravated, talked about, yes, some of the events in the black community. Advocated, that's the word, my bad. And she advocated for a lot of the businesses and other black people in her community. By this time, she had moved to Tennessee, I believe Memphis, in that area. And two of her friends were lynched. And she talked about it. Talked about it in her newspaper. She became probably the first anti-lynching activist. Talked about the psychological and financial reasons behind lynching. This angered the white racists. Her paper was burned down, destroyed, and she was forced out of Tennessee and fled to Chicago, where she continued her activism by also becoming one of the founders of the NAACP. She wasn't given credit for it, but she became one of the founders of the NAACP. So think about that, y'all, what I've just talked about. And this is for further study. In the midst of everything, watching her friends get lynched, advocating all of that, advocating for the betterment of people in her community, in her newspaper. She was a newspaper publisher, as I said before, a teacher, taking care of her family. She eventually went on to marry and have her own children. And when she fled to Chicago, her activism grew even more. I remember when I was in Chicago last year, I talked about it on my last show, about seeing in one of the main boulevards in the area, Ida B. Wells Boulevard. And I thought to myself, oh, I know her. Ida, I know her. Think about that, y'all. Who do you know in your heart who is an inspiration? So, with that being made, with that said, we're going to go to our last. Maya Angelou. Who is Maya Angelou? If y'all didn't know. One of my inspiration, and still I rise. Maya, Maya, Maya. Born in 1928 in St. Louis, Missouri. She moved to Stamps, Arkansas at an early age to live with her grandmother. Stamps, Arkansas, y'all. This happened when her parents got divorced. Later on, she moved back to St. Louis and was raped by her mother's boyfriend at 6 years old. As a result of this assault on her life and her well-being, Maya didn't even talk for 6 years. Didn't even talk. But she always, in the midst of this, loved poetry, loved to write. She didn't talk because she said in an interview later that the man who did this was caught and killed. So she felt that her talking led to that. So she didn't write. She didn't talk. But she found poetry, she found writing as a support. What has been your supports? what has been your support? Miss Angelou went on to become a great writer, an activist, becoming friends with the likes of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, writing many books, being a director, being an actress, being a teacher. She did not let adversity stop her. She went on. She went on. It wasn't easy, but she went on. She had her supports. So again, I ask you as we start to wrap up, what are your supports? What are your supports? What is your go-to? If you don't have any, how can you find some? What do you love? What makes you happy in the midst of everything? Think about that. What can we learn from the women that we talked about today? So, for Mental Health and You, this is Cynthia Timms. Daisy Bates, Ida B. Wells, Maya Angelou, Fannie Lou Hammmer. Righteous and Relentless, Black Women in the Legacy of Support. What can we learn from them going forward? Let's talk about it some more. God bless you. You take care. Be well. Thank you.
I don't remember how it started. Our back and forth. Victory. Fumble. Repeat. It always came back.
Dad! Okay, here we go, throw it! Yeah.
You probably don't remember what you told me,
That was perfect.
but I heard every word.
Nice.
If you love them enough to do this, surely you'll check nhtsa.gov/the right seat to make sure they're in the right car seat.